Welcome back, listeners. You're here for another episode of the Inspired Writer Collective. This time we are doing our monthly book club book, which was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. All of our regular listeners know that this is one of Stephanie's favorite authors, and we've talked about a number of her books within our various conversations, but this is the first time we've chosen one as our monthly book club book. And seeing as it's summertime and this book takes place in the summer, it seemed like an appropriate pick. Now, full disclosure, there's going to be so many spoilers through our conversations because we're going to be talking about our reading experience, looking at it both as our expectations as readers as well as what we think worked or didn't work from a writer perspective. So please know, just from the top, there are going to be spoilers. Most of those will come towards the later part of our conversation, but just know that going into it. And hopefully you've had a chance to read the book and you can comment and let us know what you thought about it. We certainly have some strong opinions about it, despite it being one of Stephanie's favorite authors. So it should be an interesting discussion. So Stephanie, why don't you kick us off? Now you not only listened to it, you also picked up a copy and then read it, right?
Correct. Yes. So I listen to it, and the interesting thing when I listen to books is quite often I'm driving, I'm not fully paying attention. And so it's almost like the experience of, watching your favorite Netflix series where you're just kind of going through the motions of watching it. And it's the same thing when listening to it. Uh, and then, of course, reading it was a very different experience because I felt like I had definitely missed pieces of it from when I
Mm-hmm.
was listening to it, and I'm sure others have probably had that experience too. I listened to it, of course, because I enjoyed the narrators and, very good narrators. Abby always has very good narrators for her books, so it makes it very entertaining to listen to them. And it was really one of the things that struck me, and of course, when we were first talking about this book, and you had also read it, was that I had read it through the lens of a reader who just loves Abby's books, has always really enjoyed them, and I hadn't really focused too much on how this particular book really goes to a very dark side of mental health, and it goes deeper than her other books. And while I know she's very, Abby is very conscientious about doing her research when writing her books and is very thoughtful, I felt that this book went a little bit further, in the sense that it felt like the main character Emma's response to a difficult relationship with her mom and this idea of feeling very small and closing herself off from the world, that she shut down so much that it didn't feel as authentic as, say, a character who has a dysfunctional relationship with a parent and sets a boundary. So that felt very different. And so, of course, there are lots of comments all over, the internet about this. And, people have commented about that. And because what's interesting is if you look at the cover of the book, which looks all sunshiny and two people running through the ocean, it looks like you're going to have sort of a little bit of a light experience, and then it gets very dark.
For sure. And you actually got to see her talk on her book tour for this book, right? Did she speak to any sort of reason as to why she chose to take it in that direction? Is she trying to branch out into other like fiction genres and used her, contemporary romance platform to do that? What was did she speak on that at all?
She didn't really touch upon it. And I think some of that is because, the audience was essentially that sort of super fan energy. Nobody asked about that aspect of the book. But if you follow her on TikTok, she does have periodically, she does have the, sort of using the popular meme with Will Ferrell doing the I don't care, where she's saying, like, just when my readers think they're going to have like a, you know, book with a pina colada by the beach, that's not what it is. And, sort of that, like, I'm just going to do it, write it the way she felt that it should be written. But yeah, she didn't really speak to that because that particular aspect of the book didn't come out. Though it definitely is a point that if you go on Goodreads and look at the 1-star reviews, was definitely what turned a lot of people off. Even people who, like me, love her books and love her style of writing. And, she is a great author. This just took a turn that's, to me, so different from her previous books. And I know you've read a couple of her other books, and you too were quite surprised at where it went.
I remember reading this book, and as I'm reading it, I'm like texting you at various points. And we'll back up and start at the beginning in just a second. But yeah, there came a point that we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. But there came a point in the book where I was just like, "Are you kidding me?" And I texted you, and I'm like, "Am I the only one that feels this way? Like this was like an insane direction to go, and this was over the top and unnecessary and dilutes what I felt like was the, helpfulness or relatability or validation for so many people and readers of, this main character's experience, of Emma's experience. And then all of a sudden it like goes to such an extreme level that it becomes totally unrelatable. And I remember that's when we started looking to see is there any other chatter online about, people being surprised by this or upset by this or, like noticing that it was not at all as far as reader expectation and what her audience has grown to expect from her. The beginning part of the book, you have a cute little love story and the way it unfolds. You have all the funny little quips and humors, and she's so good with her dialogue. So all of that was like, checking the boxes. And then it was just like this dark shadow crept in and okay, we can tolerate that for a minute. And then it just becomes like a demon, it's just so over the top. And so we can dive into that a little bit more later, but I do want to start with the beginning. So we talk a lot of the time about like showing versus telling and how to build in the backstory. And I remember texting you as soon as I read like the first page or two and being like, oh my gosh, what a genius way to give the reader all of this backstory in the beginning without feeling like you're just dumping backstory. So do you want to talk about that for a minute? Talk about the way she opens the book.
Yeah, no, I love this opening for the book because she uses the inspiration from Reddit, from a Reddit thread of Justin, who's the male main character in the book, and he's posting about how, he's had this, disagreement in a sense with one of his friends over his living situation. And so he's gotten this dog that's, not a very attractive dog. So he's named it after his former, roommate, who's also a good friend. And then it just goes into more details about, who he is and their, connection. And then the whole thing about having to move apartments. And now he's in this crappy apartment with a view of the Toilet King billboard. And so, and apparently I know from seeing her on her book tour, there's a particular billboard that's apparently all over Minnesota. It's not the Toilet King, but she kind of played off of that. So there are a lot of things throughout the book where she's using a lot of references to specific places in Minnesota. And some people have commented like, oh, there should be a little tour. There's going to be like the Abby Jimenez book tour of Minnesota because of all the little places that she talks about. And so this was one in particular where apparently there's a popular billboard, but she was like, oh, that would be so. And she had actually gotten permission from whoever this sort of, particular figure in Minnesota is to use his likeness in her book. But then she decided at the last minute not to do that and changed it to Toilet King because she thought it would be, of course, funnier to have something like that as to add to the humor. So she is very creative in adding in the humor, but there's the Reddit thread. And then, of course, it starts with the conversation between Emma and her friend Maddie, and they discover the Reddit thread, and the messaging starts and between Emma and Justin through the Reddit thread where he's at first like, "You're not a reporter, are you?" Because they also have share something in common, which is that if you're familiar with the movie Good Luck Chuck, there's the whole thing where everybody that in Good Luck Chuck, every woman he dates, the next person she meets is her soulmate. So that's, Justin's experience is that, his friend had met this other woman, and
his ex.
boom, that was, yeah, his ex, right, exactly. And it was like love at first sight. Like she describes it as being like, Abby uses the description of being hit by a truck, sort of that instant feeling of love. And so, so there's that starts, and then it starts to bring them together. So, that stretches on for quite a bit of the book, is this back and forth, and then eventually they're talking on the phone. So, I mean, as I've mentioned before, and we've had this discussion before, Abby is really good at dialogue, and she uses dialogue very effectively to move the story along and to weave in the details. But certainly the Reddit thread was just such a great way to start. And the Reddit thread is, "Am I the asshole?" AITA is the abbreviation. And so, you're immediately into, the curiosity is piqued, and then there's sort of a mini debate about, is he really or not the asshole?
Yeah, it was such a genius way to like really bring the reader in, provide all that backstory on. I think he even discloses in the post about this whole like curse that he has, and his living arrangements and the dog and the stuff. And as a memoirist, I also appreciated how he, as the character, had changed the name slightly of his friend and the girlfriend, and it was like Brad or Bruce, or I don't forget how he changed it, but
Chad,
and then like faith versus hope. Oh yeah, Chad or Brad, yeah. And then faith versus hope, like, as a memoirist, like it makes total sense. Like when you're posting about people, when you're writing about other people, sometimes you just change the names a little bit for a little bit of protection, and then you move on and you say what's going on. But yes, I thought that was a genius way to open it up. It doesn't take too long before we get into the story and start to see the way that Abby brings in her like already established characters from other books. Like we get to see, what was the brother's name? Benny, who got the transplant from
kidney transplant. Yep.
Because he's a friend of Justin's. And then, then Emma and her roommate, Maddie, they're traveling nurses, and they end up renting a house from Alexis's ex, Neil, right. And so it's like we already get to see some of these characters that we're somewhat familiar with. Neil definitely gets like a little bit more of a shine on his character in this book, which was interesting to see sort of his character development between Part of Your World, where he was kind of the bad guy, and then how he's portrayed in this book. So, you can definitely, for the people who have read the whole like series and follow these characters, it's really appealing to, get to see them again and be exposed to them in small ways, but to know so much more about that character because, you've met them in a different book, which is cool.
Well, yeah, and the dedication in this book is specific to her readers. And so they're definitely, a lot of the Easter eggs throughout and the references to the characters in previous books, which is a very creative way to, of course, you know, hook in the readers that you have from a perspective as a writer, is thinking about, like, how can you make this about your readers. And so that's definitely one way to do it, and it also piques the interest of people who just pick up just for the summer and then hear about, oh wait, these other characters have significance in other places, and then they go and seek out the other books. So there is definitely, from a marketing standpoint, I mean, there's definitely creative strategy there. And I will say that, Abby definitely has a very strong creative strategy. And, for those of you who want to do the traditional publishing route, she's definitely, I mean, Abby's, all the way traditional, but she still has to do the majority of, her marketing, and she does it very effectively and does it very well, and is, I would say, is, a good one to look to just for ideas of ways that you can market. And so we've definitely talked about that before. Because even if you're traditionally published, it doesn't mean you're off the hook for the marketing piece. And so there's that, and she creates those by bringing in all the different characters. You get the whole perspective, but you also get to know, her character development with Emma begins, and you get to see, more and more about who she is. And she's a traveling nurse, and they've made this decision to go to Minnesota. She and Maddie make this decision to go to Minnesota because she's formed this connection with Justin. And then, she and Justin connect, and it, there are a lot of, moments, and he's kind of what you would think of as what they call a little bit of a cinnamon roll character, sort of the squishy guy, a little bit with her, and provides a space for her soft landing. Though I do feel like she spends there's a heavy emphasis on Emma just turning inward and being really so dark in her sense of self, that does take away, I feel, from the pacing of the love story at times.
For sure.
The
The love story, basically, it gets so sidetracked. So true to Abby's form, she uses family drama at the central part of her story in order to provide the source of tension between the couples. So like we saw it in Part of Your World, where Alexis's, high-powered dad was an issue, and Daniel was trying to buy the house from his, what was her position? Mom? Yeah.
I can't remember. I think so. Yes. Yes.
His mom. And then
Yes.
yours truly, we have Brianna, whose younger brother, Benji, needs a transplant, and that's the source of like a bunch of the tension in there. So it makes sense that Abby would bring in family tension. Justin's mom going to prison and him having to take care of his younger siblings, and then Emma's mom, Amber. However, you and I both feel very strongly about the fact that this book took the story of Emma and her mom, Amber, over the top. And it became a very distracting, like I would almost argue that the love story was the subplot and not the Emma and Amber story. That became the main plot because that was the source of like the height of the conflict, the dark night of the soul, the resolution at the end. It was all along that storyline. It wasn't along really the love story. I also had huge issue at one point, and you've read this more recently than I have, but I remember, either texting you or calling you about it, where Emma tries to make amends after, getting small and disappearing for a while, and she shows up at Justin's house, and he says something like so out of character. And I don't recall what the
I can't remember.
Was. He says something super dismissive when she's trying to basically resolve things. And it felt very out of character for his, like you said, cinnamon roll, kind of happy-go-lucky, always trying to make things work. And there was really no support given as to why he acted that way in that particular moment, to then cause, more tension to rise. I mean, it really felt like it was like their love story was being unnecessarily drug out, in my opinion, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it went so out of character. And now for the like super spoiler portion, I was pretty upset when the storyline. Okay, so we get a lot of like the Emma and Amber, about her Amber being an
Mm-hmm.
absent mom and her disappearing all the time, and I already felt like Emma had plenty of reason and validation and support for putting distance and boundaries up between her and her mom. But then Abby took it a step further and then tried to interconnect the stories to where Emma's mom is also Daniel's mom, and hiding the fact that Emma had this extended family, and then tried to like suddenly change the narrative to the times when Amber would abandon Emma and leave her alone. She was actually over here having a good time with her family in Wakan, or however you say that imaginary town,
Mm-hmm.
which didn't
Yeah.
make sense to all of the early part of the book where you see Emma talking about how her mom would go chasing this guy or some money thing, and then she'd run out of money, and then she'd return home really like downtrodden and licking her wounds. But we know from Daniel's story, from Part of Your World, that she would go there searching for money when she was down and out and asking for money, and then would bring, she would suddenly get, money from that side of the family. So she wasn't really returning downtrodden. It did not make sense. I felt like the continuity of the story didn't make sense. I felt like it was a further reach than made any sense. It didn't need to happen. I didn't need that level of connectivity between the
Mm-hmm.
storylines. And it honestly upset me for the people for the readership that may have found validation and reassurance in Emma's story, and in putting boundaries up in situations where family members are disrespectful or just it's not a healthy relationship, to take that parent-child dynamic and make it so egregious of an abuse and neglect. I felt like really invalidated most people's experiences, to kind of paint it as, well, Emma's justified in cutting off her mom because her mom did this heinous thing, versus just letting the
Mm-hmm.
story be where it was, where her mom is clearly unstable and she needs help. And Emma thought that finally was being offered help by Neil, and this was going to be the thing, and she turned it down and ran from it. Let it be that. That's great.
Yes. Yes.
That's strong. But then it
Mm-hmm.
became this whole, oh, and by the way, she's actually got all this family she kept you from, and she's actually going here. It made no sense. And I was really irritated. And I really wish I understood why Abby felt like, I don't know, that maybe that would be like a twist, because it certainly was. I remember texting you and be like, wait, I didn't remember that Amber was the name of the other character in that book. Did you
Mm-hmm.
remember? And you hadn't either, even though we both, I mean, I read
Yeah.
that book recently. So I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
it was like the thrill of the twist and the unexpectedness, but it really upset me, both from a writer perspective of like that feels like a far reach, but also upset me for the readers that I felt like may have been able to relate to Emma's character and suddenly might feel like they aren't justified in the cutting off of their toxic family members because their situation isn't as egregious as the one painted in the book. But that's where
No,
I
absolutely.
stood. I was disappointed. The love story was lackluster. Justin was not a very strong character. And then the whole mother daughter thing took over.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with all of what you just said, and I do think, taking it that extra step was way too much, because I do think that it was enough to, for Emma and Amber to have a reconnection point, but then the disconnect, and then having Amber go through the same motions with Neil, where she's kind of pushing away this man who could potentially, help her and bring her into a better place. But then, like you said, to add that extra layer with, oh my goodness, now Emma all of a sudden has this half brother, Daniel, and suddenly her family is spiraling into this abyss of, where she's feeling even worse about herself. And I also, going along with that as you were talking, and I hadn't thought about this before as much, but I was thinking like her friend Maddie in the story is a pretty strong character in terms of
Yes.
her stance about everything.
Mhm.
And to me, it doesn't make much sense considering like Emma's a traveling nurse and she's got this really close friend that she wouldn't have relied more on that friendship because clearly they've been friends for a long time.
I mean, she's
Maddie's,
like a sister. She lived with her, right? For a
yeah,
while. Like a
yeah,
foster
yeah,
family.
yeah. She was
Hmm.
exactly, yeah. She basically moved in with her in high school and was pretty much adopted by her, Maddie's, moms, and it was this whole thing, and they were always reaching out to her and wanting to include her, and and Emma always pushed back from that, and it that seemed unrealistic that she wouldn't have leaned on her friendship more, um, and that she leaned in a little bit with Justin, but again, there were maybe a few cutesy moments. I mean, a memorable one is when he's rowing the unicorn floaty out to the island where the house is that she's on, and she's been sick, and there's sort of that cute moment, but then it just seems to, as we've discussed already, just turn into, well, let's try to solve Emma's mental health issues. And it just doesn't seem, I don't know, there's an aspect of it that doesn't seem believable as a nurse to, when you're taking care of other people, to not be able to in some way take care of yourself. And maybe that's something that nurses struggle with sometimes because there's the stress of the job.
Hmm.
And I know that Abby talks to a lot of people and gets feedback from people who are in these specific fields, so maybe there's something about the travel nursing that's different from other positions. I mean, I know it certainly can be very stressful, so maybe it's a case of you can do for others what you can't do for yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, and but it just, but I think again, there's just that place where the love story does get lost. Like I remember finishing the book and thinking, I'm not really sure, like what the where it went in the flow of the story. Um,
Yeah, I definitely didn't buy into the strength of them as a couple like I did with Brianna and Jacob or Daniel and Alexis. You leave those stories being like, "Oh, this is a match made in heaven. This is such a strong couple." And I did not feel that about Emma and Justin. They were a cute couple, but did I think that
mhm.
they had any sort of like staying power? No, not at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think there was an aspect of, maybe it was the fact that like his family kind of had, the dysfunction with his mom going to prison. Like he's trying to navigate that, and then he's navigating that while being faced with Emma, who's navigating her stuff.
Mhm.
And I mean, it was cute the way the way she wove in the sort of trying to get rid of the curse with their like, well, how many dates do we have to go on, and like different aspects of their dating experience. And and he would send her little invitations, and so there were cute things woven throughout, but again there was so much that where it just went dark for
Mhm.
so long, and you're just thinking, I mean, it's almost painful as the reader. And maybe that was her intention, is going to that place of pain. And I know she's talked about in different interviews that she does use a lot of inspiration from her own experience in life, so maybe there is an aspect of that that's here. Uh, but I do think that as someone who has set a boundary with a parent in my life, that it doesn't have to be that dark, and
Mhm.
there are ways, and maybe for some people it is, but I just feel like, especially for, readers who are anticipating a light summer read, considering it was was a Good Morning America book club book and all this stuff. And I mean, there's so much hype around this book, and which is great for Abby. I mean, but at the same time, there's that piece of, okay, I guess maybe at a certain point as an author, you can have some leeway when you have a strong backlist, and, readers will forgive and move on. And I mean, a lot of people do comment all over, I follow all of her things, where they're commenting like, oh, this was the best. I love this book. This was so wonderful. And maybe it depends on the lens that you're reading it through. I mean, as I say, when I first listened to it, I didn't, get into that depth of the dark side, other than listening to it towards the end. I do remember thinking like, this feels like it's going on and on for a long time. And maybe I tuned it out because it was going on for so long. And so then it did feel hard to read, like to actually read through that part of the book, because I was like, this does feel like it's going on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so we're super curious what you guys thought. If you've read this book, did you love it? How does it rank within, the number of Abby's recent books, as far as like which ones are your favorites? Or did you also find yourselves questioning why it had to go that dark, or why there needed to be that added twist at the end? And did that make sense to you? Are we missing something? um, Comment, let us know. We want to hear, your take on it. For me, this would not be the Abby book that I would recommend to somebody. I think I would recommend probably Yours Truly, because I just love Bree's humor and the way that character is written, but she's also really good in Part of Your World as the best friend. So both of those I think are great, but this is not one that I personally would recommend. What about you, Stephanie?
No, I agree with you. I loved Yours Truly because I loved the letter writing aspect of that connection between the main characters. And again, I felt like Bree was a super strong female character who really like held her own and knew what she wanted. I mean, there was just a real sense of strength, and the her relationship with her brother and his need for a kidney transplant did not take over the book in the same way.
Right.
I would also recommend the uh, Happily Ever After playlist, which is actually her first book, but is often people think of it as, her second book because it wasn't as well known initially. But that's also just a really fun one. The love story is wonderful in that one. So those are two that I really enjoyed of her books. And I will also say, listener, if you're really curious, I would hop on Goodreads and look at the 1-star reviews, because even a bestseller that's, been on, across every bestseller list, she's been on the New York Times bestseller list, she's been on USA Today, this book Just for the Summer has received so many accolades. It's on so many different book lists of best summer reads for 2024. It's everywhere, that even the books with the most accolades still get 1-star reviews. So if you're thinking like, I don't know about getting my voice out there, just go read 1-star reviews, and even pick your favorite book and go see the 1-star reviews, because even the best authors get the 1-star reviews.
Absolutely. So we're going to be continuing our monthly book club discussions. The book for next month is Go as a River by Shelley Reed. Now, she is a local Colorado author, and this is another author that both Stephanie and I got to hear talk on panels and in discussions at that recent conference that we went to in Crested Butte. So we do have some kind of inside perspectives as far as the author's journey and everything too, to add to that conversation. So hope that you'll read along with us for that book. I know it had a smaller platform in the beginning, but at the time of the conference, Shelley was sharing with us that she had just signed 37 international contracts. It was being translated into a number of different languages. So now you should be able to find this book everywhere. It's going to be one that people are talking about. And it is set in this little town of Iola, which is now buried under the Blue Mesa Reservoir. So it was one of those towns that got flooded out in order to create the Blue Mesa Reservoir that's outside of Gunnison, Colorado, in western Colorado. And so this story takes place in that old town that no longer exists. And it was a story that she spent over 10 years writing. It's her debut novel. So there's going to be some great discussions. I've already started reading this one, and I love, there's so many great things to say about it already. So tune in next month for that discussion. Please read along if you'd like, and then listen in on our conversation. Subscribe to our channel. We also have our weekly newsletter that goes out, and we always provide some additional fun things within the newsletter related to our weekly podcast topics. So check that out. Thank you for your likes. Thank you for your shares. Thank you for your 5-star reviews. We are here and continuing to do this because we get such great feedback from you guys about how much you admire the fact that we're still here chugging along each week, and also that you get stuff out of these episodes. And so thank you guys. We appreciate you all so much. So until next time.